Hi, I'm Colin Huffen. I'm Head of Regulation and Standards at CIMSPA, the Chartered Institute for the Management of Sport and Physical Activity. We're the professional body for the sport and physical activity workforce, and our vision is to make sure that we have a recognised and respected and inclusive sector that everyone wants to be part of. The numbers of disabled people in our workforce are low. It's not good enough. We must do better. We must all do better to recruit, train, support and retain disabled people to be part of the sport and physical activity workforce. We must remove the barriers for disabled people to enter the workforce because fundamentally it's the right thing to do. And it isn't as hard as you might think as well. We've worked closely with EmployAbility to develop a guide to support training providers to understand how to recruit, train, support and retain disabled people to be part of the sport and physical activity workforce. And we at CIMSPA will be embedding the learning from those guides into our endorsement and quality assurance processes, making sure that we're there to support all education providers in embedding that learning into their training practice. So therefore, we have a greater number of disabled people entering the workforce and the barriers are removed for them. Our ask of you is to please read the guide, but not just read the guide. Don't leave it as one of those tasks that falls down your to-do list, but make it something that you take action on as a result. Make sure you do something as a result of reading the guide to improve your business practice and to enable disabled people to enter the workforce. It's not a nice to do. Fundamentally, it's the right thing to do. We at CIMSPA are here to support you to do that. If there are any other recommendations that you want to take as a result of reading the guide, then please do get in touch. Thank you very much. Today I'm looking forward to speaking to Elaine Briggs from Future Fit Training, Kelly Rodriguez from UK Coaching, and Michelle Felix, a visually impaired group exercise instructor who runs her own successful business. Thanks for joining us to talk about the guide. Do you want to just introduce yourself and your role at Future Fit?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Elaine. I'm Education and Partnerships Director for Future Fit Training and Future Fit Group. And for those of you who don't know about Future Fit, we are the leading learning and development provider in the health and fitness sector.
What do you think the biggest challenges are to attracting disabled people to be fitness instructors or personal trainers or group exercise instructors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we do have learners who have disabilities who do train with us and you know, are successful in the sector. But yes, there is I think a barrier really, and I think there's a few reasons. I discussed this with the team prior to talking to you, and things that were mentioned were the perception of the fitness industry, and I think that's not just for people with disabilities, but any person who doesn't fit into that lycra clad, you know, under 25 fit, looking great when they run on the treadmill. So I think the perception, I think we've got a lot to do in our industry to change the perception, to make it much more inclusive. We talk a lot about inclusivity, but I don't think we're there yet. So I think that is one of the main barriers is people thinking that they just won't fit in. Also that they wouldn't be able to access training properly, that it's not designed for them. So, you know, for example, you've got a visible disability, you may feel that that's going to set you back, that people aren't going to engage with you, whatever, or that the training itself isn't designed. You know, if you've got an issue with hearing or whatever it may be, you sort of think, well, I'm not going to be able to go to that course. That won't be set up for me. If I've got a learning disability, they won't be going at my pace.
As well, what experience do you have of adapting your course to meet disabled people's needs?
We do take most people on an individual basis because disabilities are far and wide, and there is always this preconception, isn't there, that disability equals somebody sat in a wheelchair, and it's not. We have a person at the moment who's on our course living with Down syndrome. So we have to change our kind of approach. We're working a lot with his parents to make sure that, you know, he's understanding everything. He's going at a slower pace. When we have people who may be amputees or have a physical disability like that, we have to make sure that the venue is set up right, that they've got the right equipment, or that we can adapt the equipment. Laura Farchi was one of our learners a few years ago in nutrition, and obviously she's Paralympian, but she's blind. So our digital e-learning, we had to work with her unbelievably clever software that allows her to even do text message and all sorts of things. It's quite phenomenal, really. And work with her software and really sort of get our heads around that. Sometimes with learning disabilities, they need to go at their own pace. We have to remove kind of deadlines and things. And of course, we have to make sure that our tutor team are supported and aware. We can't just expect them to know what to do. Like I say, because the disabilities are so varied. But to be honest with you, until I've sort of seen this guide, there hasn't really been a training provider guide. There's different guides through different disability charities, but we've really previously had to go out and find out the information, which I'm more than happy to do. But I think this guide will actually really help and again raise the awareness.
Excellent, thank you. This can sometimes be so much information, can't there, on these topics? You never know whether you're going to a verified source and whether that's credible or not as well. So what did you think to the guide? Do you think that there'll be anything in there that will help you as a training provider to make those adaptations to support disabled people entering the workforce?
Yes, I think so. I think I'd like to say I sent it to our team to have a look at as well. And, the feedback was that it is very helpful, very usable, easy to use, easy to understand, something that we'll probably go back to, and use as a guide going forwards. I think really for us and for all training providers, there's always costs associated to changing your delivery and the software and the staff training that would involve. So all considerations, not complete barriers, but if CIMSPA, for example, sort of stated that actually education partners going forward need to have this, do whatever. I think if all training providers, were in the same boat, then I think it would be easier. But no, I think it's a really great guide, really welcomed by us. And as I say, a resource that I'm sure we'll keep going back to.
We CIMSPA have been heavily involved in the development of the guides, and we're working out at the moment what it will mean for us and how we can implement some of the guidance from the guides into our quality assurance procedures as well. So that may then help you in terms of making those changes or selling those changes to your senior management team and things like that as well. So yeah, we think it's definitely, there's a lot to learn from the guides, and I really liked your point around perception at the start as well, that the guides do heavily focus upon the marketing of our materials to disabled people, as that was identified as one of the biggest barriers from disabled people as well. So if there's one thing we can change at CIMSPA, we know that's one thing we're going to learn as a result in terms of how we can market the sector to be more inclusive, to see people like you, to attract people like you into the workplace as well. Is there anything you guys have taken on so far that you think you'll be putting in place? I know you've not had a lot of time to read the guide and interpret it, but are your initial thoughts, do you think there'll be things that you will change in terms of your training provision?
Yeah, I think the first part, we're actually just working on our people strategy at the moment, and I think it's quite timely because this can feed into that. Whilst our people strategy is about us internally and not externally, our learners, it starts with us internally. It starts with the FutureFit team. So I think it will be used to kind of influence that people strategy when we're looking at things like recruitment and all that kind of stuff, to make sure that we've thought of everything. It will then, marketing, obviously, as you said, is touched on. But what we will then do is, as part of our tutor training and our tutor induction and everything, I think we will probably take elements of it and make it available as a resource to our tutors, our sales team as well, because our sales team are the first people that get to speak to our learners when they phone up to find out about courses, and that's where the journey starts. If somebody has got a disability, it's made aware of at the point of sale, and then passed on to student support, and the journey continues. So, it'll touch on every part of our staff, definitely, but I think, from a practical basis, the tutor team, the delivery teams will really benefit from this knowledge. So that's the first thing. It starts with the people strategy, and just highlighting really, how we are accommodating this population. So thank you.
No, thank you, Elaine. That's amazing. It's excellent that we've got firm commitment from you to change your business as a result of the guide that's been published. Absolutely. And that's exactly the purpose of the guide to help inform you and guide you from there as well. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate your honest answers to the question. It's been lovely speaking to you again.
Thanks, Colin. Take care.
Thanks. Afternoon, Kelly. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Colin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for coming to talk to us about the guide today. I'll just start with the first question. Can you tell us a little bit about UK coaching and what you're doing to make training more accessible for disabled people, please?
Yeah, sure. So UK Coaching Solutions, and including our awarding organisation First Sport, we fundamentally believe that everybody should have access to learning, whether that's regulated or unregulated. So, for example, we will work directly with coaches to create learning that's accessible in multiple formats and understand their learners' needs. Or, for example, we'll work through partners such as our national governing bodies or private training providers to advocate accessibility through their methods of delivery as well. So as an example, whilst we're talking about accessibility, we might be talking about people with impairments and disabilities, but actually it's broadening access full stop. So, providing, for example, access to experts directly to the coach, as an example, through free to access products, so that even cost isn't a barrier perhaps for those that are maybe on low income or maybe not be able to afford to access potential training, for example. So that's what we work really, really hard to do at UK Coaching.
Excellent. People often think of accessibility as things like lifts and stair ramps, don't they? Actually, there's a lot more to it than that, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And the guide has a section about making digital resources accessible. Do you think that's important as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we've learned anything post-pandemic, it's about the value of digital resources. And I do think that the more we can do to make that accessible through things like, for example, screen readers or just thinking about software and platforms and not assuming that everybody is digitally savvy and literate, I think as well is a really key thing to think in mind. So there's been some research I know that the government had done around the digital divide, and I know that as we steer towards a more digital first approach, I would say, in terms of design and access to services and training, as an example, learning, it can widen that gap a little bit. So I do think that whilst our digital resources, digital learning is our friend, it's what we're perhaps more leaning to as our first stop. I do think we just need to be mindful about who isn't able to access that digital offer and how can we make that more accessible as well.
Yeah, completely. I think we've all been heavily reliant upon digital technology in the pandemic specifically, haven't we? Without it, I don't know what we would have done. But I think, we do need to play a little bit of catch up on, okay, is everybody able to access this? Is this the right approach?
And who isn't in the room is what I'm also really interested in. Yeah.
Excellent, yeah. What types of resources do UK Coaching use in your training, and how do you make them accessible for people?
Yeah, so the first thing we do is listening to the learner, listening to the insight. So we really are led by insight in every decision we make. So often we're hearing first-hand from learners or via delivery centres about the difficulties of delivering through perhaps pure digital means. So more recently we've taken a more hybrid approach to delivering learning, so we're not sort of going just 100% digitally, because we also recognise in our sector in particular, coaching's a people thing, it's a doing thing, it's a skill thing as well, and whilst we might be able to dial up, for example, knowledge delivery on perhaps e-learning or on a platform through things like our digital toolkits, we also appreciate there's a lot of value around maybe workshopping either online or face-to-face around sense making and deepening that understanding further. So things, for example, like coaching philosophy is a really big topic to try and deliver online through an e-learning or a purely digital means. Coaches still report through our insight that they want to get together, they want to collaborate, they want to mix with like-minded people, learn with each other, have their learning facilitated, and then ultimately you've got the blended approach where you're actually getting into some of the doing, and for an assessor, if it is going to be in a regulated environment, to be able to safely assess people to make sure that they are fit to practice, it's a really valuable tool. So but for us it's about how they all blend together and how we shift the energy of that content, of that learning, and where is it best placed. What we have found recently is that learners are really, really well aware now that they don't need to go and sit in a venue on a specific day and time to be told information or to attend lecture style events, they will happily turn around and say, I'm pretty sure we could have learnt this online, because they are much more aware now of technology and how it can be utilised. But like I said, it's about how we really use that hybrid approach to its best advantage to support learners.
Absolutely, yeah. Some of the great examples I've seen from UK coaching are when you provided information in a variety of formats, so it gives learners the choice as well.
100%.
So that both not only meets the customer's needs, but also has a very accessible approach to the learning as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
Bro, do you think you'll take anything from the guide? What did you find useful about it?
Yeah, I thought the guide was, it's just an amazing document. I really love that the guidance is really tangible. So we're not just talking hybrid here. What I really like about it is that, for example, there's a section on screen readers. So it's something that I've worked with for quite a number of years now here at UK Coaching. And I remember the first e-learning build we did back only probably about 3.5 years ago now. And the e-learning authoring tool, which I won't name, was not accessible for screen readers, and we had to manipulate what is alt text, basically what a screen reader reads from, and there was no sort of magic button you could press and it made it accessible, and it added, small things like that added to the cost of a build, because it was almost like building an e-learning course twice in the background. But since then, in the last 3.5 years, e-learning technology, for an example, and digital technology has come so far that actually it makes the job of developing e-learning much easier, to be a lot more accessible. And it is simply now the flick of a switch. Instructional designers across the land now say, well, it's a little bit more than that, but it is now, compared to what it was, a flick of a switch to basically say we want this now to be screen reader compatible. But what I really like about the guide is it doesn't just say e-learning needs to be screen reader compatible. It tells you what a screen reader is and who might be able to use a screen reader. And it goes a little bit beyond that in terms of talking about a screen reader isn't just for those with a visual impairment. It talks about a screen reader that's really helpful for anybody that actually would like to hear the screens being read out to them as opposed to them reading. Well, that opens up that accessibility for a lot of people, quite a lot of the population. So that's what I really like about the guide. It just goes a little bit deeper. And a section particular that I really, really liked in particular was the funding section. So it's not something that, unless you have a disability or unless you work within that environment, you're not always privy to knowing what streams of funding an individual might have access to, or what we could draw down as individuals and agencies to support the development of a product that's going to help somebody. So for me, that was really, really helpful, because sometimes a barrier for an organisation to creating accessible learning can sometimes be the cost, and I think that by understanding a little bit more about funding streams that could be available will hopefully help people and organisations to consider it, for sure.
Definitely, that's great to hear. Thanks, Kelly. Have you seen any changes in recent years? Do you think you'll see more people? Have you seen, and do you think you'll see more disabled people getting involved in coaching and leading sport and physical activity?
Yeah, so probably just pre-pandemic, we saw a significant increase in our awarding organisation, First Sport. We saw a significant increase in a request for special considerations coming through, not only around assessment, but the learning itself. And with that, we also found that we had an increase in requests from partners who wanted to look at their learning programmes to make them more accessible and their assessments more accessible as well. And that's around coach education, because they want to open their doors to encourage more people with a disability, or people from all walks of life that might not necessarily be able to access that type of opportunity. They wanted to start to open them doors much more. So I definitely have seen an increase in that. And then the second thing as well, I can speak on behalf of UK Coaching, is we more recently in the past couple of years included a simple question on our recruitment to some of our learning. Do you require additional support to aid your learning, or do you require any additional support? And that simple question has opened up the conversation with individuals to understand, well, what is it that we can do? So we know more people with a disability or support needs are accessing our products because we know more requests are coming through, and they're not big onerous requests. I mean, we're talking, can we have the slides up front before the presentation so that we can digest the information, or I can pull it through my screen reader, or can, for example, my BSL language interpreter come on as well as part of the session to help me understand what's going on. And these are not huge things that organisations have to sort of flap about. These are really small things that actually make a massive impact. So yeah, I have seen an increase absolutely with coaches or potential coaches coming through and taking on our learning, for sure, who have disabilities or impairments.
Absolutely, that's a perfect takeaway message to finish this interview. Actually, some of the changes that you need to make aren't that difficult and don't cost anything. All you need to do is open that conversation.
100%, yeah.
Right, well, thanks for joining us today, Kelly. Really appreciate your time you spent with us.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Michelle. Thanks for joining us today. It's lovely to see you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Colin. Nice to be here with you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Michelle, you're a qualified fitness professional. You're a successful businesswoman and visually impaired. Would you like to share a little bit about your story with us, about your journey?
Yes, well, I started my company, Michelle Felix Group, because of the lack of exercise to music that was audio described for visually impaired people. I had attended many exercise to music classes. What I mean by that is, things like aerobics, movement, and the instructors had tried their best to be descriptive, so that I could follow the actions, what was going on in the class, but it was never quite adequate. So I felt, I could do something about that.
Excellent. So you must have trained at some point to be a fitness instructor. How did you find that process of training to be a fitness instructor?
Okay, so I did the instructability scheme, which basically was an invitation for people with disabilities to enter the fitness industry and to be positive role models. At the time, I did my gym instructing along with my level 3 disability and exercise qualification. There were challenges along the way in terms of accessibility, in terms of not being able to access the course material, which were mainly PDFs or hard copy books. That was one of the barriers which I had to get over. For my exercise to music exam, I had a spotter. I was the first visually impaired trainee instructor. I had somebody who we would call a spotter. So that's somebody who could observe anybody within the classroom doing, within the fitness class, looking unwell or maybe adopting bad form, which could be harmful to them, at which point I would be alerted to that to deal with.
That's amazing. It's great to see that you've been through that journey, and also been a role model for others, hopefully, as well, that would like to be qualified and now visually impaired as well. I'm sure the training providers learnt a lot from the experience and the feedback that you've given them as well within that. So what sort of reaction do you get when you tell people you're a group exercise instructor?
Normally they're very surprised, and the usual question I get is, well, how does that work with your eyesight? And I think it's really because people are not aware that it is possible to train with the right support in place, because it's not that I have a disability which prevents me from doing it. It's more about the environment needing to be suitable for me to be able to undertake the training. So yeah, usually they're surprised. That includes disabled people as well, who just aren't aware that it is possible It's possible. It's always possible. There's so many things out there today, whether it be technology or just simple workarounds, which can be put into place just by having a discussion.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just asking the question, isn't it, and having that open conversation about how we can help and what can we do to support you in achieving your aims, isn't it, really?
And another thing that's just come to mind, and that this is about accessibility with the training. One thing that was very, very useful for me when I was doing the training was we had a model skeleton in the classroom, and it was great because where I may have struggled with the anatomy and physiology to see things, I could just touch the skeleton, and I could, it was tactile learning. So there's lots of different ways, we can.
Definitely. Well, I'm not sure about touching a skeleton. I'm not sure I'd be able to.
It wasn't a real one, honest.
That's what they told you. You feature as a case study in the guide, so thank you for coming forward and helping us with that. So what would you say to the training providers that are reading that guide? What would you say to them? What are your main points that they could do to help people who are visually impaired access their training?
I would say definitely have a read of the guide. Even if you've had some experience of visual impairment before or any other disability, I think there's always something to learn, and a refresher is always good. There's information on how to make the training environment accessible to people with disabilities. It includes course material, reasonable adjustments, so many things. I would say definitely have a read. I think it will help you just to feel more confident when interacting with somebody with a disability. Just to know that, we're all people, and just having that awareness, I feel, will really just give you the confidence to just go for it, make your organisation more accessible. It will talk about the recruitment process for training, how to attract people with disabilities, how to keep people with disabilities. Yes, go for it. How to have the conversation without feeling, you don't know what to say. Can I use this word or that word? Definitely have a read.
Excellent. I think my main takeaway has been from supporting developing the guide that it's about openness and communication. Nobody's going to get everything right all of the time, are they? But as long as we're open and we communicate and we ask the question, and we're open to the feedback that we receive, that's all people really want.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Bro, what would you say to other disabled people that are thinking about becoming fitness instructors, personal trainers, group exercise instructors?
I would say really consider it. Even if you may not have thought of it as something that you can do before, I will say if you've got the heart and mind to do it, you can do it. There is a way. It's so rewarding, to see people's lives change through physical activity, get stronger, become more mobile. For some people, there's even just having the social interaction is such a biggie. Very, very rewarding. You can do it.
Excellent. I completely concur. It's such a rewarding profession. It's such a rewarding position to be in when you're training people to help other people as well.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, that's the end of the questions. Thanks for joining us today, Michelle. Really appreciate your thoughts and your feedback on this guide.